Welcome to ITAD Talk and part 2 in this series. Here's your host, Jeff Bittner.
Hey, so another question for you, and this kind of goes along with the security aspect that you were talking about. But a party that we interacted with, who I won't name, sold off some IT equipment without removing several of the USB sticks containing login information. And I'm just wondering, have you experienced a similar data security problem in the past?
Not personally, but I have several friends that have been on both sides of that equation. We were fairly good about, sanitizing hard drives. We basically, anything that was a hard drive or magnetic media or optical media, we would destroy rather than resell. So anything like, copiers or hard drives, USB drives, anything that was written to SANs, for example, would get destroyed rather than resold. But anything that was like a circuit board, main board or CPU, RAM, stuff like that, would get sold off.
So this kind of plays into the next question. In what ways have you noticed data security being compromised at the hardware level rather than the software level?
I haven't seen too much of it, at least not in my direct exposure. Most of the time, you've got to get physical access to the hardware. But, like you mentioned with the reseller piece, I mean, the reseller component is, how do you control data sanitization of the equipment that's coming out of the building? And how do you do that with sign-off and accountability? There's, in my experience, there's always someone that's like, oh, we've got these old extra servers. Does anybody want to take them home? And, we're going to chuck them in the dumpster. So they might take them home, and then they're like, man, I can make, $1,000 off this old server. I'll throw it up on eBay, and then they sell it on eBay. Somebody buys it, and it's still got, customer data on it. So I think that, the way to really fix that issue is kind of the approach that we took. Anything that's a permanent storage medium, hard drives, optical disk, backup tapes, just treat it as a disposable expense. I mean, it's been capitalized. It's not really on the books, so just destroy it. The other component of risk that you have at the same time is service calls. So, let's say you have a SAN that fails, HP or whoever it is, sends out a tech to replace the drive. They take the old drive with them. They put in a new drive. Don't let the tech take the drive. So you're like, look, our policy is the drive stays here, and then you destroy it. You just say, all right, I'll buy my new drive at, $2,000 or $3,000, whatever it is, to replace the drive, rather than process an RMA, because not that it's likely that the data would get out, but if it did, the potential cost of that far outweigh the cost of
the drive.
A couple $1,000. Yeah.
Correct. Yeah. So what were some of the biggest challenges working as the CISO for Sierra Cedar?
Let's see. I would say that the biggest challenge we initially had was hiring. And from what I've heard, that's still a really common thread with other CISOs. The cybersecurity industry has effectively a 0% unemployment rate. I mean, there's such a huge demand for technical resources and experienced cybersecurity people. So you have to really look outside the box. I mean, one of the best investigators I ever hired was actually an accountant when we hired him. His kind of hidden talent, and the whole reason I hired him with basically no cybersecurity experience, was that he was really good at parsing through really detailed spreadsheets. And, when you're doing investigation on the cybersecurity logs, being very detail oriented is not a skill that you can just acquire. It's something that's kind of an innate talent. And he did it really well. So we said, all right, we'll take a chance on him. And he was amazing. I hired another guy, probably one of the best problem solvers that I ever had on a team. I hired him. He was fixing laptops at the Microsoft store. Had done some undergraduate work in cybersecurity and had applied. And so we brought him in, and I threw a bunch of problems at him. And he was just like, you could tell, like he understood the raw tools of how to triage a problem, come up to a logical hypothesis, test the hypothesis, and then come up with a final answer. And he was great. I worked with him for about 10 years. He was awesome.
It's funny that you mentioned that, because when we're hiring people to process electronic parts, we've been using Indeed, and they have a test called attention to detail. And we only hire people that hit the top 2 rungs on that. And probably 30% here are on the top rung and the rest are on the second rung. And it just seems like that takes so much out of the equation. Then it's more like, how teachable is that person? And, are they going to fit in with the group and everything? So, it's
100%. It's, I think you guys are definitely on something.
The culture is what I'm trying to think of.
Yep. Yeah, I think it's, you hire for talent, you hire for teachability, and you hire for culture fit. And if you get those things right, then, you're probably going to do pretty well.
Right. So what drove you to start Rocketansky?
I don't know entirely. I think it was, I hit, so I was really heavy into computers as a kid. I got my first Atari when I think I was 3 or 4. And immediately, I'm like, that was the best thing ever. And I knew from the moment I got my very first computer that whatever I was going to do the rest of my life, it would be with computers.
Is this back when the time when you were playing like Pong?
Pretty much. Yeah, pretty much. My first computer was a 8286 IBM clone. It wasn't even an IBM. It was just some random parts that somebody had thrown together and threw in a box. I had a 4-color CGA monitor, no hard drive, 2 5 1/4 floppy drives, so you could run the operating system on one diskette and then run whatever app or program you wanted to run. And I had some very very lame ASCII-based games. I mean, that was Sleuth was one, and it was like this little smiley face ASCII character that you moved around the screen and would type commands to investigate a room. And it was very cheesy by today's standards, but it was this ability that it was like you built this interactive world, and it just kind of captured me as a kid. So fast forward, to I'm 16, 17 years old, mid 90s, and there's Netscape and these big companies that are launching out in California, and it was a really exciting time because it was all these things that you had heard about with computers that all of a sudden it was becoming real. High-speed internet, no more dial-up modems. When the first iPhone came out, it was like, wow, this is a totally different way to do things. Like, it's going to change the world. And it was almost like as a nerdy, geeky, science fiction-y kind of kid, like a lot of this stuff is all of a sudden finding its way into your hands. And there's something innate about wanting to be part of it, to shape your own vision of it. And so I think I carried that with me throughout my career. And fortunately, I was in a position last year after Sierra Cedar got acquired that it was like, okay, I've been here 20 years. Wow. I learned a whole bunch, and now maybe it's time for me to go do this startup that I've always been thinking about. So
neat. Wow, that's great. You finally got a chance to do that. I noticed that you had made a comment on the quantum computing discussion about how it will render RSA vulnerable, presumably. What challenges might be presented by a shift from the Internet's standard encryption protocol, RSA, to a different encryption technology?
Man, it's going to be complicated and it's going to be messy. It's just going to be messy. I think that on one side, it's easy in that most encryption algorithms that are used today are fairly plug and play. I mean, they're fairly well defined. People understand how they work. They've been around a long time. So it's really just a matter of, okay, how do I replace this one particular widget with a better widget? So if you need it's like swapping batteries in a TV remote. If you can get something that's stable and proven and vetted, then I think it's fairly simple, relatively, to swap out older algorithms for newer ones. I mean, we've been doing that, within security for a long time. Moving from SSL to SSL v3 and TLS and upgrading instances of those. It takes time. Because you're kind of trying to march the entire ecosystem forward at the same time. So it's, browsers have to be able to understand it, operating systems, and the browsers are coming from different companies and operating systems from different companies. But I think there is one truth is that the overall the tech industry has gotten better with some of those initiatives. I think once you get kind of a collection of folks involved, it's the inner working to move a technology standard forward is fairly seamless. I mean, moving from earlier versions of TLS to the latest versions, there was never been a really massive, big break in the internet or something that wouldn't move forward. So, I think we've practiced the process of migration enough. I think the biggest question is really on the technical side. Is finding algorithms that are resistant to that types of computing. And I think some have been identified early. It's just a matter of when do operating systems or applications support those newer algorithms, and then getting everybody to move in tandem.
Okay. And another question is, which organizations and also which types of IT employees have you noticed are the most invested in ensuring compliance to standards like ISO 27000, NIST, and et cetera?
I would say all, only because it's expected of them. I think the biggest challenge is when you're working like business to business, for example, each business is going to have some standard that they have adopted as their own. So it could be a NIST, it could be, they're going to ISO, it could be, CIS, top 20. But there's generally some standard that they've aligned IT and security around, and they use that as somewhat of a yardstick to say, here's where we need to be, or here's what needs to be done. There can always be this challenge where you've got two companies that are working together, but they're working on different standards. And so you end up with a little bit of, we need you to do this, but this other standard says to do this, and they're slightly different, but the intent behind them is the same. So I think that the real challenge is understanding the intent of each of the cybersecurity frameworks, and then finding alignment between what they say. What is the real risk that they're trying to solve? And if you can talk in those terms, then it's much, much easier to have a conversation across companies or across between IT and security, or even IT to IT, whether it's networking or Windows or Unix.
Okay. And so I really didn't get a chance to ask you, is there anything that you like to do on a personal nature? I mean, now that you're getting back out, anything that you like to go out and do for fun, or any interesting trips or anything do you want to tell us about?
Yeah, I mean, I'm back on the marathon training track.
Really?
So I ran last year, 2020. I had run half marathons. I'd run some 10Ks over the last 4 or 5 years, and finally I was like, all right, I'm going to go do a marathon. So I was looking around for a marathon, and they had one down at Disney World. It was the Disney Marathon weekend, and they have something called the Dopey, which is the 5K, the 10K, the half marathon, and the full marathon. So you don't just run a marathon, you run all the races leading up to the marathon. So total, it's 48.6 miles. So, I'm like, all right, I'm going to go run my first marathon, and I might as well just sign up for all the other races too. Wow. How bad could that be, right? So I went down there, successfully completed all the races, did my 48.6, but it was the hottest marathon on record in Florida. It was, I think, 87 or 88 degrees. And so it got so hot on the course that they ended up cutting about 1.5 miles of the course off. And so this was mid-January. It was that hot down in Florida. And, so it's like I finished, and, it was like I feel it's my first marathon, but at the same time it wasn't, because I didn't run the full 26. And so I got back, and I started looking around for another marathon to go run. So about 5 weeks later, I ran the Atlanta Marathon. And it was one of those things where it's like, my goal is to run a marathon. So I want to see 26.2, and I want to run a full marathon. So came back to Atlanta, had a couple months to kind of recover and get over the 48.6, and then I went and ran the Atlanta Marathon. That was March the 1st, and then I think like COVID hit like that following week, and then everything kind of stopped, like all the races stopped. So just did the Atlanta 10 miler yesterday, which was great, perfect running weather, and now that things are cooling off, it's kind of nice. It's a way to get out of the office and just go run.
Yeah, it's funny that you mentioned that, because my son Kyle Bittner, he's our VP and GM here. He was in Atlanta yesterday and ran the Spartan 5K obstacle course race.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. So that
very
was
nice.
In fact, his sister Brittany also did the race with him. So anyway, I just want to thank you very much for taking the time out to be on ITAD Talk, and wish you a great rest of your week.
Yeah, awesome. I appreciate it.
And don't forget, the best way to support ITAD content is to rate and like the show on iTunes, Google, Spotify, or anywhere you might listen.